Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to my channel. My name is Paul, the Canadian Snowman, here once again with some more awesome history videos. We're on doing the Aztecs. We just did the, what did we do? We did the Inca. Really cool stuff. We just finished the Maya, and I guess the Aztecs kind of play a role into kind of like near the end of like the Mayan Empire. So I know it's not an empire, but the Mayan civilization, kind of cool stuff. So, interested to see how the Aztecs you know, I mean, I guess they kind of part of they were they had something to do with the end of the Mayans, kind of, right? But it'd be kind of cool to see how the Aztec civilization or empire is compared to the Inca, and the Mayans. So definitely cool. Like the Inca, it was an empire, and then Maya was a civilization, and then how they had have one king, so that's why it's civilization, right? Yeah, something like that. I'm confusing myself here, but we're on the Aztecs. Like I said, I've heard of the Inca, the Mayans, and the Aztecs, and before these videos, if you would have asked me what the difference between the three were, I would have no idea. I thought they were all kind of the same thing. Probably would have pointed at the same kind of pyramids, like those Mayan pyramids. That's what I would have pointed at for all three of these. But obviously, we got to learn some cool stuff about all three of these and know the differences now and all that cool stuff. So it's not a mystery to me anymore anytime I hear one of these names. But we're on to the Aztecs, guys. All I know is I think they do have an empire, and that's about it. So I'm assuming they have some kind of the same kind of technology as like the Mayans because they're kind of neighbors, right? But anyways, guys, let's get to it. Please hit that like and subscribe button below while we jump into the Aztecs. Do me a full screen. Yeah.
This video is sponsored by Brilliant. This educational platform has a great offer for our viewers which you can learn about at the end of this video. In the middle of a marshy island, so useless that the 1 million people living in the lands around it saw no reason to claim it, rose an empire of people with such a fierce will that they smashed every obstacle placed in front of them and conquered their world. Gold, silver, feathers, chocolate, bark paper books, and lines of captives destined for sacrifice streamed into the metropolis that was Tenochtitlan, along its innumerable streets and canals. This constantly moving anthill was the center of the Aztec Empire. This is the story.
Wow, hold on a second. Look at that. So that's like a drawing of what it was. Like, did they find this drawing? I guess we'll find out, but wow. That's crazy. So far, it seems like the civilization, I don't know, has gone up. Like the Inca, and then I think the Mayan, were kind of a step up from the Inca kind of thing, with I guess their kind of technology and what they were doing. And now I think it seemed I've only seen I'm only 48 seconds into this, but just about a look at this, I mean, it seems like the Aztecs have kind of taken another step up, kind of thing. Because look, that looks amazing. Anyways, yeah.
Anthill was the center of the Aztec Empire. This is the story of how a destitute people conquered their world. By the 13th century, Mexico had already seen the rise and fall of great urban civilizations, such as the Teotihuacanos and Toltecs. Called Anahuac by the Mexica, the Valley of Mexico was home to over 1 million people, making it one of the most densely populated areas on Earth at the time. It had been a hub for urban civilizations for thousands of years. Now, two new states had achieved dominance over the region: Culhuacan, located in the south, and Azcapotzalco in the northeast. It was into this already long-established world that the Aztecs suddenly entered. They were the last of the nomadic tribes to migrate into the valley from the north. The valley was already quite full, and so the Aztecs were repulsed and ejected from wherever they tried to settle. They may have spoken Nua, the language of the great Toltecs, but other than that they were completely alien to the civilized inhabitants of the region. The Aztecs, however, brought an unmatched skill in warfare, and soon found themselves fighting as mercenaries for both Culhuacan and Azcapotzalco. But their punch.
Wow, so they could have been like just mingled with the people, and I guess obviously they're gonna end up taking over. I guess the Aztec Empire, but they could have just mingled with the people if they were accepted, and maybe this empire never even happens. They just kind of blend in with everybody. Everything's all hunky dory. But apparently, they're getting paid to be mercenaries, and probably the only ones that are really good at fighting. Eventually, when you grow your numbers big enough, you'll be able to take over. So I guess that's kind of what's going to go down here. Maybe, I don't know.
Penchant for violence and sacrifice soon disgusted their employers. After sacrificing the daughter of the king of Culhuacan, the Mexica were driven into Lake Texcoco. Their patron god, Huitzilopochtli, had promised them that they would find their true home when they saw an eagle poised upon a cactus eating a serpent. Upon entering the blue water of Lake Texcoco on a miserable swampy island with little arable land, no wood nor stone, they saw their god's sign. They settled there in 1325, but it would be another 50 years until they were organized enough to name a king, a Camapichtli. Barely a century later, this destitute people had soaked up the culture of the region, named themselves as the successors of the Toltecs, and began an incredible series of conquests. The Mexica built their great empire by forming a triple alliance with two other city-states, Texcoco and Tlacopan. Together, they sacked Azcapotzalco and became the dominant power in the region. Now free of any competing states, the Mexica conquered from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific, and then south towards modern-day Guatemala. Flooded with plunder, their capital, Tenochtitlan, soon surpassed Teotihuacan and Toltec Tula. Great palaces, pyramids, and gardens rose out of the waters on Lake Texcoco, as the Mexica built a floating city that left the Spanish conquistadors gasping upon first seeing it. Soon Tlacopan and then Texcoco.
Floating city? How'd they do that? It's not really floating. They just kind of like filled in the water, I guess, with land, like just like a landfill. And wow, that's impressive. I guess it's hard to take over, a city or town or whatever if you gotta go over water, right?
Found themselves in the back seat of an alliance dominated by the ever-growing power of the Mexica. By 1500, the kings of the other two states were basically civil servants to the Mexica emperor. Taxes and tribute were supposed to be divided amongst the three, but it appears that the Mexica in Tenochtitlan shared what they wanted when they wanted. This triple alliance formed what we know as the Aztec Empire, and was on its way to becoming a single-headed Mexica-run state when the Spanish arrived. It's important to note that this is the Aztecs' own history of themselves, not an exact and perfect timeline of events. And it is known that a certain Mexica advisor...
Yeah, I guess anytime we go look at history like this, you gotta kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, who you're getting information from. So obviously the Aztecs are going to make their civilization look so much better than probably it really was, they probably make themselves look extremely glamorous and all that stuff when it probably wasn't the case, like I guess many times, history is written by the victors, right? So it's something to keep in mind, I guess, through all these kind of shows, or whatever you want to call them.
Tlaquelo, a man that helped forge the Triple Alliance, transformed Huitzilopochtli from a tribal god to the supreme patron of the Mexica, massively increased the emphasis on human sacrifice, and essentially established much of the imperial systems of the empire. He also erased much of Mexica history. In order to promote the new Mexica Empire, he burned and destroyed evidence of their humbler past. Let's take a closer look at Tenochtitlan, its full name being Mexico Tenochtitlan. One of the Spanish soldiers, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, wrote this about his initial impression of the city. "We were amazed on account of the great towers and pyramids rising from the water, all built of masonry. and some of our soldiers even asked whether the things that we saw were not a dream. The city was unlike anything in the old world. It would have been bigger than any city in Spain, with a population of at least 250,000, possibly more, making it one of the world's largest cities. The Spanish particularly found the botanical gardens and zoos to be extremely impressive.
Wow.
The Mexica had transformed the poor land into highly productive gardens through canal irrigation and the use of chinampas, which were highly fertile artificial islands. The city became so productive that it could support a population level that, after being nearly wiped out by the conquistadors, their native allies, and smallpox, would not be reached again until the 20th century. The citizens used the canals for transport as much as they used the streets. Hernán Cortés speaks of the people talking as they go along, some on the land, the others on the water. The main causeways leading to the city were cut by wood bridges, which could be removed in case of attack or if a canoe needed to pass through. Water was the superior means of transport in a country without a single draft animal. Within the city, teachers and students met in the Calmacan.
That's actually like really, really smart. I mean, because it's a lot easier, obviously, to move goods by water. It doesn't take as much effort. And yeah, being surrounded by water and having your canals and stuff, man, that is perfect sense. Very smart. You ain't got like the big animals to help, transport the stuff. So that is like really neat. Never think about that, but yeah, that's really cool. I was like, dang it, some cool stuff like this ends up coming to an end. It's like, dang it. Yeah, if you're the Spanish and you're showing up, you're seeing that had to be extremely impressive. Like, if you think it's a dream, you probably don't want to leave, maybe. I wonder if some of them, like, actually, like, ran, like, ditched the army just to kind of settle down, when they were about to leave to go home.
And Telpachcali. These schools were where most Mexica children received educations, making it one of the only societies at the time where nearly all were educated. Streets and canals were jammed with merchants and porters that brought tribute and goods in from across the diverse empire. The Aztecs ran a tribute-based empire. So rather than invading lands, killing everyone and taking over the territory, they instead forced their past enemies to pay tribute. Everything else stayed the same. People kept their kings and gods and homes.
Isn't that kind of like what Rome did, when they conquered an area? They just made, like, basically the places they conquered pay taxes or tributes or whatever they want to call it. It's kind of like the same thing Rome did. It's very smart, people, it doesn't, it's better to keep these people alive and you kind of get free stuff from them than killing them and then having to kind of like work yourself for it,
Homes. This made the Mexica incredibly rich and widely hated.
This is how fast YouTube is with Brave. Notice how there's no pre-roll ads? And here's how...
Pyramids and palaces dotted the city where priests praised the gods and carried out bloody sacrifices. Aqueducts brought fresh water into the city, and every day thousands of street cleaners swept across the city to keep the main streets clear.
Yeah, I never knew they had like aqueducts and stuff. I thought that was just like a kind of like a Roman thing. I mean, I'm sure there's other places in in Europe probably had aqueducts at this time too, probably. But it's just kind of neat that other side of the world basically doing the same thing,
And neat. All on a tiny island in the middle of a lake. Let's move on to what is probably the most controversial and infamous aspect of Aztec civilization, human sacrifice. If you know anything about the Aztec civilization, it is most likely this. That they practiced human sacrifice is beyond doubt. To the Aztecs, there was no activity more glorious than capturing men on the battlefield or to die there for Huitzilopochtli. The culture of Mexica sacrifice is best explained by Michael D. Coe. The victims were ideally enemy warriors. When an Aztec took a captive in action, he said to him, "Here is my well-beloved son," and the captive responded, "Here is my revered father." After the victim had been ritually bathed, there were 5 possible modes of sacrifice. The usual one was by stretching the prone body over a sacrificial stone, opening the chest with a knife of flint or obsidian, and ripping out the heart, which was then offered to the gods. All warriors believed that they were destined to die this way, being transformed on death into hummingbirds which went to join the sun god in his celestial paradise. In all likelihood, several hundreds, perhaps even a few thousand young men so lost their lives in the Aztec capital each year. This was done because in the Mexica worldview, the gods needed nourishment, worship, and payback. The world had a finite amount of energy, and the gods needed energy to keep the universe alive. Thus, energy had to be released from living things to pay the gods. It was necessary in order to ensure the sun rose each morning. Each time a priest took a life, they were keeping the doom of their world at bay. Due to this cultural trait, Mexico warfare had a huge emphasis on capture rather than killing combatants on the battlefield. Men that would have died of their wounds or infections on battlefields elsewhere instead died on sacrificial stones in Mexico.
What?
This also resulted in events known as flowery wars, a perpetual war where both states would fight but never finish each other off, primarily fought against the Tlaxcala. If the Aztecs had
Wow, so the warriors wanted to go out this way. I was gonna say, if I went to battle and I knew that, like, if I got captured, that was the outcome. Like talk about like a painful death and everything. I'd fight till I couldn't fight no more. I'd die on the battlefield because I'd rather go out and have my head sliced off or something than getting my chest or stomach cut open. Dang, that is brutal. But they did it to honor the gods. That's what they believed in. So, I mean, I'm sure they probably did it proudly. Knowing that that's just the way it is. So, wow. I don't really the Mayans really didn't go into that much detail about that. It seems like the Aztecs got a lot more of their history kind of preserved. It seems like there's more details here. I mean, I guess the Mayans did have a lot of details. I guess the way the sacrifices. I mean, the Mayans did the same thing with sacrifice, and it seems like the Aztecs are just trying to up the Mayans.
primarily fought against the Tlaxcala. If the Aztecs had focused their might on the war, they could have wiped out the Tlaxcala. But it would take a huge toll on their empire and resources. So they instead pinned down the Tlaxcala while at the same time guaranteeing a constant stream of captives and training. The Mexica also instituted economic sanctions on the Tlaxcala and forbade anyone from trading certain items with them, such as cotton and salt. Without knowing it, they had provided a powerful and well-trained ally to the Spanish, as the Tlaxcala would supply infantry and refuge to Cortés. Let's have a look at the military aspect of the Aztec Empire.
Yes.
Mesoamerican warfare in general is fascinating, as it was very different from that of the Old World. For one, the cost of movement in Mesoamerica was so much higher than in the Old World. There were no animals that could be used to transport anything, which obviously had an enormous effect on warfare. Without horses or donkeys, the soldiers had to carry their provisions themselves, or would need special porters to do it for them. This meant that Mesoamerican armies could rarely travel for more than 8 or 9 days on their own supplies, so waging wars more than 50 or so kilometers away was a logistical nightmare. Promotion in the army was based on the amount of captives a soldier took, and if a man proved himself, he may join one of the knightly orders and become a jaguar or eagle warrior. Your average Mexica warrior would be equipped with a round shield and a wooden sword tipped with razor-sharp obsidian blades, known as the macahuito. Some would have bows, but most would...
Also, that's probably a good reason, I guess, why the Spanish were so successful against them, because obviously that's more of a slashing weapon, and obviously full-plated armor against the Spanish, I mean, it's going to do nothing to it, And so, like, obviously, you'd want to like stab at that kind of armor and get kind of between the plates or something like that. I guess against the Spanish, but I guess these kind of weapons really not much effect. So I guess it makes perfect sense why I guess the Spanish would be pretty dominant, right? Even if they're outnumbered. But anyways, back to
known as the Macahuito. Some would have bows, but most would be equipped with an atlatl, a spear thrower device that hurled projectiles, along with thick cotton armor. When battle started, it was unlike anything in the old world. Warriors would spread out and fight one-on-one in separate duels, trying to knock the other out rather than kill them. Nobles and generals wore highly visible symbols, tall reed and feather constructions. This was so that they could be easily seen in battle and their deeds noted. However, it only made it easier for Cortés and his men to find them during battles and wipe out the Aztec military command easily. All of this puts...
I remember watching like the Mayan video and kind of pointing that out, like, why you make yourself easy targets with one. I guess they're kind of neighbors, so they had similar fighting styles. But that's definitely interesting. It's like, rah, okay, let's go over here. We're gonna fight one-on-one. Like, it's definitely a cool, interesting way to kind of go at it. So you're not really gonna get, I guess, blindsided by like a sword or something, or whatever, a machete or whatever it is, from the side or the back, because probably gets to the dishonorable. They just rather just fight straight up, with one-on-one. That makes sense. That's cool.
Puts into perspective how the final war of the Mexica was doomed. The Mexica and Spanish were not fighting the same war. The Mexica wasted precious time capturing Spaniards or their native allies in battle, while the Spanish focused on killing as many soldiers as possible. Even when the war was lost, the Mexica would have assumed a bitter negotiating process was about to begin, where the Spanish would demand tribute, just as the Mexica did when they conquered. They could never imagine that their entire civilization, along with their gods and emperors, would be snuffed out. In our series on the pre-Columbian civilizations, we learned about the many inventions of the natives of the Americas. Trial and error.
It's like, it's just two different worlds right there. I mean, the Spanish, the less numbers you have, the better for us. We're just going to try and wipe you out. And the other guys, they need the bodies for the sacrifice. So if you have one side trying to actually kill the person, the other side just trying to knock him out, the one that's, just trying to kill him probably knows this and can easily use that to their advantage. Plus, they probably have a lot, sharper, more deadlier weapons, obviously, which would be an advantage. So that's definitely really interesting. And that's the end of the first part. Wow. Arrival of Cortez and the conquistadors. I can't pronounce the dang thing. I'm sorry. Never mind. But yeah, we'll be doing that one obviously next in this series. But anyways, yeah, please hit that like and subscribe. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you stick around for the rest of the Aztecs. This is very interesting stuff. I love all the details and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely stick around. I know I am, and because I want to know what happens next. Kind of this thing that kind of went by fast. But anyways, peace. Catch you guys in future videos. I am out of here. Woo!